and then move on to Kat Russell, who is beginning the program in her community of Gold Hill, which suffers from the opposite problem of Denver in that they are such a remote community with so few paved roads that they will lose power for hours and days at a time in the winter months when there's a storm coming in, and they get very little help from XL because they're not a large community, so they don't have a large powerful voice that can really drive action. And I think it's important you hear from that opposite end of the spectrum.
So I'm an electrical engineer, and I was involved with the what we called the Resource Management Commission in Austin, Texas, back in the early 2000s, when we were first putting wind into West Texas and dealing with the utility scale issues there. So I have some experience with working at that city level. But then I ended up teaching climatology at the high school level on the mommy track for about 15 years. And every year, as I was teaching climatology, it's like, this is getting worse. This is getting worse. So finally, when the pandemic hit, I said, I've got to go back and put my effort where my mouth is. So I quit my teaching job and retooled, and I'm back in as an engineer designing solar PV systems. So I have several different things that I want to tell you about today. One is that as Jan has been talking about, I've been involved with my little community of Gold Hill, Colorado, which is a town of about 200 people. We're in the mountains west of Boulder, about 30 minutes.
I know where that is. Yeah.
And we aren't incorporated, so we don't even have a city government. We have a group of people that gets together every other month and talks, not really at random, but sort of at random, about t-shirt sales and things like that. And then we have a very active group that's called the Mountain Stewards, which is loosely associated with the town meeting. And this Mountain Stewards group has this really rich group of retired solar engineers. I'm one of the solar engineers, though I'm not retired yet. We also have people who are like retired grant writers from international nonprofits and so on, and event planners and all kinds of people who just happen to live in Gold Hill. So we have this really intense, high-powered group that is collaborating with the 100% committed committee of this organization to do some demonstration projects in Gold Hill. So I want to tell you about those. And I also want to tell you just a little bit about a demonstration project that I'm working on, which is my own house, which is off-grid solar. And I'm working towards taking an off-grid solar house to 100% electric and net zero, which is harder than you would think. Most off-grid solar houses are not anywhere close to all electric. They use a lot of fuel. The third thing that I really want to touch on is getting to the really personal level of what are some of those things that you can do yourself, because as Theron noted, there's about a 20% gap if we trust Excel to even meet their own goals that we really need to meet with distributed solar. So starting out with the first one of those things that I want to tell you about is the community of Gold Hill and some of the projects that we've done here. So this high-powered group of grant writers and solar engineers wrote a grant for DOLA, which is a state-level organization, the Department of Local Affairs. And we got a grant to study Gold Hill as a community and to say, what are the ways that we can be both responsible from a climate perspective, but also resilient, because as climate change happens, of course, we want to head it off, but we also need to deal with the fact that we're in the mountains and we've been evacuated a number of times for fires. We've had fires and floods right here in Gold Hill. And so we're also concerned about resilience at the community level. Because as Jan noted earlier, XL tends to go down for days up here. It was down for 6 days last year. Not 6 hours, not 6 minutes, like you're used to in the city, but 6 days. And they had to park a dumpster out there for everybody to clean out their spoiled food and dump it in the dumpster afterwards. Because a lot of people didn't have backup power. So with this DOLA grant, we hired a group of people to do a study, which they jokingly said the advisory group could have done the study ourselves, which is true. But we hired a group to do the study, and we were thinking we would do something sexy like a mini grid, and we would put solar on the town-owned meadow, and we would isolate Main Street, which is about 15 houses, from the grid when the grid goes down, and we would run it off of a local mini grid, and we would get, you know, grant money to help with building this mini grid. Well, when they studied that possibility, what they discovered was that for our community, remember we have like 200 households, only 15 of them live on Main Street. So it really didn't make sense for a number of reasons. One of them being that Excel doesn't like for you to isolate, you know, sections when the grid is down, and power them in another method. And a second one is that so many of our people who are part of Gold Hill really live outside of town. So the recommendation that they came up with was the best way for Gold Hill to go 100% solar, or go 100% renewable, and also to have the resilience that we can get from distributed power, was to go to every household having distributed solar with a battery backup. So that's our plan. We're not trying to build a community solar garden. We're trying to put solar on as many houses as possible in Gold Hill.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. That's a beautiful idea.
Isn't it a beautiful idea? So you know, my house is an example. We have a number of off-grid houses up here, but of course, most of the people are on-grid. So we're talking, for most people, that's an on-grid system, although some of us are off-grid.
We have deeper into the difference between on-grid and off-grid.
Off-grid just means you're not connected to Excel. So I'll give my house as an example. There's a power pole at the end of my driveway, which is 600 feet from my house. When we bought the house, Excel told us it was going to cost $25,000 just to run the wires from that pole to our house. And I said, $25,000 will buy me a lot of battery. So Excel. So we didn't connect to Excel. The house already has some solar on it, and I'm in the process of upgrading it so that I can add more electric appliances and burn less fuel. Yeah, let me transition a little bit to talking about my project. So
1 second, Britta's got a question for you, Kat.
Sure. Is it in the chat?
No, she just has a hand raised.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Go ahead, Britta.
Shoot.
Sorry, Kat, that was an accident. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. My little project, my partner and I bought a house, which was a demonstration project back in the early 2000s when it was built. It was the most thermally efficient house in Colorado. So it's super well insulated. It's about 1,200 square feet, and it takes very little heat to keep it heated in the winter. Even though we were videoing bubbles as they froze at -6 degrees last January, just for fun. We don't have to use that much fuel to heat this house. So that's the first step when you're going to try to go to net zero, is to make your house as efficient as possible. It doesn't make sense for us to be trying to run all those buildings in Denver off of renewables if we don't first make them as efficient as possible. So if you're looking at the first step with your house, first step is And I actually had a slide for this, but I'm not pulling up my slides. Really, first step is to reduce the number of square foot per person. There was a study that was done at the national level, and Western Boulder County came up as the highest per capita carbon emissions in the country. And I called up the guy who did the study and said, "What's up with that?" And basically the problem is that that the new houses that are being built in Boulder County are so incredibly huge on average. There are a lot of houses up here where, you know, 2 people live in a 5,000 square foot house. You can't make that a climate responsible house. The first step is just reduce the number of the square footage. So 500 or 600 square feet per person is plenty. And then you make it more efficient. So you work on insulation and making sure that your house doesn't take too much energy to heat, because heat is our main, the main thing that we're spending power on, at least in Gold Hill. So, so with my off-grid project, what I'm trying to do is go towards all electric appliances. And so the first one that I want to mention, again, heat is our #1 thing that we're spending fuel on up here in Gold Hill. So there are several of us who are looking at high altitude, cold climate heat pumps for heating. So a heat pump is just what your refrigerator has. It's not fancy technology, but they haven't traditionally worked very well in very cold climates or at high altitude. You end up with losing efficiency. But both Mitsubishi and Arctic, which is a Canadian heat pump company, have come up with new technology that is increasing the efficiency of heat pumps at cold climates and at altitude. So I wanted to mention that the efficiency of a heat pump is actually better than the efficiency of burning methane to heat your house. So burning methane is fairly efficient, but a heat pump actually, if you look at the efficiency of how much electric energy it takes to generate a unit of thermal energy, you would think 1-to-1 would be great. Like LED light bulbs are basically 100% efficient. All of the electric power that you put into an LED light bulb comes out as light energy. So 100% energy conversion. That's why LEDs are so wonderful from a climate perspective. Heat pumps are even better. A heat pump is usually it has an efficiency of 400 to 500%. That's not a trick. What it does is it takes, if you have 1 unit of electric energy, it creates 4 to 5 units of thermal energy. How does it do that? It pulls the energy out of the air outside. So even if I'm at, let's say, 20 degrees outside and the inside of my house is at 65, I can pull heat from the cold air outside and put it into the warm air inside at an efficiency of 4 to 5 times. It's magic. It's amazing. And it works.
I hate to interrupt you, but we don't have time in today's meeting for a heat pump educational seminar. So,
but these are the things that we're working on in Gold Hill, is to try to encourage people to go to heat pump technology and to encourage them to put solar on their houses and put batteries on their houses. So those are the 3 key technologies: heat pumps. And I did feel like I needed to explain it just a little bit because people don't necessarily know why a heat pump is exciting from a climate perspective. So heat pumps, solar on your house, and a battery.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And you know, while we're talking about heat pumps, there's also solar thermal. So you can put extra solar panels on your house and drive thermal heating that way as well. It's just not photovoltaics, it's a different kind of solar panel, but that works for heating your home too. So there really are a lot of solutions at the personal level. And you have a question, Kat, that does Gold Hill have anything on the web about their efforts?
We're working on that. We do have a Gold Hill website, and we do have a Mountain Stewards page on that. It's mostly at the present. There's a thing about that DOLA grant, and you can read the report if you're interested in reading reports about why we came to the conclusion that distributed solar was the best way to have a climate resilient community up here. And recently we've been working on fire mitigation efforts, because that's another, we have a grant to do some forest thinning around Gold Hill and try to reduce our fire risk. So that's a lot of what you'd see on the web, not so much about the solar effort yet. But we're working on increasing the number of solar households up here. And one other thing that I wanted to say about solar is that, and I've learned this since I've been working as a solar designer for the last 6 months, and just watching projects go by my screen every day that I'm designing. I'm mostly working in New York and New Jersey with a big company, but we're saving people money from month one. So one of the things that we often have to overcome in climate reality work is that people have these ideas about renewable energy that are based on 10 or 20-year-old news. So what you may not realize is that solar is not expensive. Solar actually saves you money. So if you put solar panels on your roof and then you're leasing them from a company like mine, or you're buying them with a loan from a bank or from a credit union. We have Elevations Credit Union in Boulder has great solar loans. You're going to save money on your electricity from month one. And that's completely beside the point of you're doing it to save the planet. You can actually save money. And I think people don't realize that because it wasn't true 10 or 20 years ago, but it is now. That's not true if you're putting a battery on. The battery is going to cost you some extra. I'm just talking about the solar by itself. But the battery gives you a whole different capability, because you can have resilience when the grid gets down. So you end up paying for that service.
Kat, before
yeah.
you completely move away from the web information on the web question, I am actually a web specialist for the Boulder County Assessor's Office. So if you would like to reach out to me, if there is anything I can do, my time is somewhat limited, but I might be able to provide an extra pair of hands on that score, if that would be useful.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think we have a whole lot out there at the moment, other than the report that I mentioned.
Unless Britta has hit the wrong button again. Britta has a question.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Kat. I'm so inspired by everything you're doing, and I can't wait to see it all come to fruition.
Okay.
And I wanted to say another amazing thing that you can do with these battery packs is you can actually make money off of them through net metering. So if you collect more solar than you need in a typical day, you can sell that energy back. Am I on mute?
So Mary A is unmuted, so we're hearing her background noise. There she goes. She's muted. Go on, Britta.
Oh, sorry about that. So you can sell your energy back to the utility company through something called net metering and make money. So it's the closest thing to free money out there. And like it's just, you think about the process of it. It's so beautiful, just collecting sunlight just from from the sun. It's so simple and it's so genius, and I'm so excited to see what you do.
Yeah,
Britt, I'm going to take it one
it's
step
true.
further. Sorry, Kat, but I wanted to make sure you both knew that we passed a bill this last legislative session that allows you to become a master meter operator, which means if you
Wow.
produce more solar than you use, you can sell your solar to anybody on your site, like if you own a duplex or if you have a mother-in-law house, or off-site. If you own a totally different property, you can provide them with their electricity via your solar panels. So there's so much that we can do to create our own distributed grids that are not dependent on Xcel Energy's official corporate support. And this is all three of these bills: the bill to limit the installation fees to $500, the bill to allow master meter operators, and I forget what the third bill is, but I put it in the chat, are all designed to increase the use of rooftop solar and explore more distributed grid options to keep the reliability of the grid more effective.
Well, that's a great segue. I think since we've got 15 minutes left and you've got so much wonderful stuff to report on, Jan, I should pass it on to you.
I will take that handoff and share my screen again. So I don't know if Patty Kelly is still on the call, but Patty Kelly is your legislation chair this year, and she can provide you, if you didn't receive it as a member of the legislation team, she can provide you with a summary of last year's legislation. I want to go through this coming up year's legislation. So let me find the slide. There we go. This year, we are expecting about 30 climate bills. We had 53 of them last year. Huge bill for addressing climate change, including things like performance benchmarking of commercial buildings, so that we can require increased performance efficiency from commercial buildings. And it has to be increasingly efficient every 5 years. But now we're working on bills that will be introduced next January. And so I wanted to give people an overview of what bills we are working on for next year, because this year during the off season, this in the summer and the fall, before the legislature starts to meet again in January, is when we do all of our planning for the bills we want to introduce next year. So some of the things that we're working on is a bill to provide oversight of oil and fracked gas operations. I'm referring to it from now on as FG, because one of the things that we passed last year was methane capture from landfills, dairy farms, coal bed seams, places where methane is naturally leaking into the environment, which is different from fracked gas. So we have these now 2 sets of methane that the state is supporting. So we're going to look at oversight of oil and fracked gas operations, because this year, believe it or not, the oil and gas industry is claiming zero extraction. They are paying $0 to the state of Colorado for all the oil and gas they extracted in 2020. And they're doing that through a tax sleight of hand that is allowing them to claim more deductions than they pulled out of the ground. And so we're not getting our money for all the minerals that belong to the people of Colorado that they took from us. We're going to do a real-time third-party monitoring bill for oil and gas emissions, because they self-report right now and we don't believe them. We don't think they're telling us the truth. So we're going to be looking at that. We are going to run an energy storage bill with the Colorado, sorry, there should be an extra C in there, with the Colorado Climate Action Network to develop a hydrogen or a supercapacitor pilot project. Supercapacitors being the next generation beyond lithium ion. So we're going to be looking at ways that we can produce storage that is longer than the current limitations in a length of time for lithium ion batteries. And then Joe Rondon, you're on the call and you're the new vice chair of regenerative ag. Chris Hansen wants to run a carbon farming bill that really encourages and pays the agricultural sector to sequester more carbon. So it provides them with an additional revenue source over and above crops. or livestock, because those can be so badly impacted by climate change, by drought, by wildfire, by crop failure. We want to give our ag community, which is roughly 3 times the size in revenue to the state of our oil and gas community. That's how much our ag community contributes to state coffers. We want to give them more revenue opportunities and sequester more carbon in that sector. And then 350 Colorado is working on divesting the Public Employees Retirement Association so that people are not investing money in fossil fuels anymore. And they're working on a public banking option so that we can have a green bank in Colorado and people can go to a public bank and get financing for green concepts. They're working at changing the global warming potential factor. All of you who have been to training know that methane is 86 times more warming than carbon. But right now we count methane on a 100-year time scale, and that means we only count it as 28 times more warming. And that's not accurate. Methane lives in the atmosphere for about 20 years and massively holds on to more heat, 86 times. And then it degrades into carbon and hangs around for another 100 years. So we want to fix that flaw. And we are also the 5th largest exporter of natural gas and the 8th largest exporter of oil in the country. So we want to start counting the emissions that we export, not just the emissions that we burn within the state of Colorado. Clean Energy Action, which is a Boulder-based organization, is working on a microgrids bill to encourage more distributed solar. And Kat, wouldn't it be great if Gold Hill could be to glom onto that as a pilot project? And I would love to hook you up with Edie Hooten, who is the Boulder state rep running the microgrids bill, and Clean Energy Action, which is a Boulder-based nonprofit working on the drafting the legislation for that. Colorado Communities for a Livable Climate is working on closing coal plants by 2025. Colorado Businesses for a Livable Climate is working on making a state power authority so that we are no longer dependent on XL to reduce its carbon footprint. We can actually have a state power authority that we can control that will generate 100% renewable energy, and a pay-as-you-save program that will require utilities to pay for your increased efficiency appliances. So they buy your heat pump for you, and they get paid back by collecting on the savings that your heat pump provides you over your old natural gas boiler or furnace or whatever method you're using now. And then CHC, Citizens for a Healthy Community, is working on watershed protections to link the fact that there are many communities in the state of Colorado that are already above 1.5 degrees C. And in those communities, we don't want to install any more carbon emissions technologies into those communities because they've already warmed more than the IPC standard. So these are just some of the approximately 30 climate bills that are going to be run through the legislature next session. And if any one of those calls your name and speaks to you tonight in your dreams, reach out to me. I will drop my email in the chat box, and I am happy to put you in contact with these legislators, and you can actually help write climate legislation instead of just, I mean, we'll all come back to you and bug you about contacting your legislators to vote yes on climate legislation, but let's make sure we write good legislation in the first place. So that's what's going on at the state level. Next up is working with Congress. The infrastructure bill only ended up providing 8% of its funding for clean energy projects, which is just a massive disappointment and a very successful lobbying campaign by ExxonMobil and the other fossil fuel companies, which they got caught bragging about. And so we need to reach out to our senators on creating a second bill that we pass via reconciliation, meaning we only need 50% of the votes to pass, plus the vice president, who's the tie-breaking vote. and we can run a climate bill through reconciliation, and that has to be done by the end of the calendar year. So Climate Reality has been talking to both Michael Bennett's office. I met with Suzanne Brooks, Michael Bennett's climate manager, last month, and talked about the infrastructure bill and about the Thrive Act, which is Ed Markey's bill to require renewable energy, a just transition, et cetera. And then I had 2 meetings in the last month with John Hickenlooper's Enviro staffer and legislative aide on the Keep It in the Ground Act, which is no more fossil fuel drilling on federal lands. The CORE Act, which is the Colorado Outdoor Recreation and Economy Act that protects Colorado's public lands. And again, the infrastructure bill when we were trying to save some clean energy stuff and we were not successful. John Hickenlooper was a member of the bipartisan council that put together this compromise legislation that screwed us out of all of our climate change stuff. So what I want to know from the membership is, do we want to keep meeting with our senators between now and the end of the year to continue to apply pressure on them to pass via reconciliation a climate-focused bill that has all the other stuff that Joe Biden outlined: electric school buses, a national charging station network of 500,000 charging stations coast to coast, more offshore wind, just transition, training for people to move into clean energy fields. All of that climate stuff is not in the infrastructure bill. We need it, and we need it this year, because next year is an election year and we may lose the House or the Senate. So drop your name in the chat box with a note that just says Senator, or something that gives me a clue that you would like to be on the next call. Both Michael Bennett and John Hickenlooper's aides are waiting to hear back from me about whether we should schedule another call. So all I have to do is not reach out to them if nobody's interested, or reach out to them and schedule another appointment, and we can work together as a group to keep the pressure on our senators. Any question about working with senators? Okay. Lastly, we've got our congressional delegation, of which really the 4 Democratic senators are the ones that are making things happen on climate change. We as a chapter have not talked to Ed Perlmutter or Jason Crow. Ed Perlmutter did introduce a bill to encourage energy efficiency and conservation and renewable energy sources for housing and to create sustainable communities. So I would argue that we should talk to Ed about trying to get this bill passed and what can we do to ensure passage of a bill that encourages more rooftop solar. Jason Crow is not on any committees that affect climate change, but he is supporting the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Act, the American Wilderness and Public Lands Act, which is Diana DeGette's no drilling anywhere in the national forest, anywhere in the country. But he hasn't introduced any climate legislation, and I have not reached out to him. This is a crying shame. Joe Neguse, who is a member of both the Natural Resources Committee and the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And we as a chapter have not talked to Joe Neguse, and that is wrong. That is bad. We need to fix that. There is just no way one of our own congressional reps should be right in our backyard, this integral to passing climate legislation. And Joe has personally introduced and sponsored the Civilian Climate Corps, which is AmeriCorps for the climate, the Carbon Cost Act to put a price nationally on carbon emissions, the Climate Resilient Communities Act, and the Sustainable Agricultural Research Act. And that's just the first page of climate bills that Joe Neguse has introduced. And so I propose to the membership that a monthly call with his Enviro staffers are something that we absolutely should, as a chapter, prioritize. And then finally, Diana DeGette is her Enviro staffers are somebody that I have a standing meeting with every 2 weeks. And right now we are talking about carbon capture utilization and sequestration. How do we implement carbon capture technology so that we can start sucking some of this carbon out of the air? And Diana just last week introduced the Clean Energy Innovation and Deployment Act, which is setting a clean energy standard for the nation that will drive decarbonization. She has personally introduced the bill to reinstate the CAFE standards to pull us back up to higher mileage per hour, miles per gallon vehicles, because Trump rolled that CAFE standards vehicle mileage standard back, and Diana is reinstating it. And then, of course, she is working on both Colorado federal lands protecting and America-wide natural lands. So I am happy to set up a chapter meeting that is separate from my meeting every 2 weeks with their Enviro staffers, and just have a climate reality meeting with Diana's Enviro staffers and see what we can propose to her and how we can help her get her legislation passed. So that is the status of our congressional delegation. Please, if you want to play a role in talking to our legislators, just as I said, indicate senators in the chat box or put the congressperson whose district you are in, whether that is Jason Crow, Joe Neguse, Ed Perlmutter, or Diana DeGette. If you are in any of those 4 congressional districts, put their name and your email or your name in the chat box, and I will hook up a meeting for us to pursue this, because this really is our climate moment. This is our best chance, possibly our last chance, to have meaningful climate legislation not only introduced, but passed by this Congress. And we have to act, and we have to act now. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our meeting. So I will open it up to questions for any and all of our presenters. And thank you so much for your time.
Jan, really terrific meeting tonight. Thank you for pulling all of this together. And as Jan said, this is our climate moment. So we do hope to bring some of you along on this. I see many emails in the chat box.